Okay, I'm borrowing this diagram here, but I think it's useful. If we think about what we're working with in Chapter 2, in Module 2, I just took my solution. So you add a book and remove one based on the observable, which you're creating by hand. Okay. I'll get to the observable we're creating by hand and how to understand it better, but just to give you an idea, when you have the mobx, which we talked about, it gives you that observable. You don't have to create it yourself. So you can create a data model around it and subscribe to it, pub sub pattern, and give updates and get broadcast back to you. And so the data model has the observable for mobx, and then a view model wraps around that and transforms that data to put it into the UI later, where you have the components, your React framework or whatever it happens to be. I'm trying to squeeze it down a bit. Okay, so when we're using mobx, we don't write a separate file for observable, because we get it we get it from the observable as mobx, so we're not writing it ourselves. But in this case, I'm going to put that aside here. In this case, we're actually writing our own observable. So this is our mobx, essentially, our state management tool, our observable state management tool. And I think probably the most difficult part of this lesson is, in my opinion, it was the presenter, what happens in the presenter and its callback. This right here was confusing to me, this load method. Okay, but if we work our way back, let's start with the gateway. Okay, gateway is a driver to connect to the database. In this case, it's just it's an API we're hitting. It's an API we're hitting, but either way, you connect to the database, and then you load up the observable, which is your data model, essentially, is the observable, and your repository is a host around that to excuse me, the repository is going to provide your data model, and the observable is essentially your data that you're tracking. So anyway, so the gateway, we know how that works, right? Get, post, delete, so on and so forth. And then the observable does not have anything to do with the API or anything like that. It's just where we store the actual values that come in. So this is a separate deal here. And so we've got our value, the observers array. So the value is the data. That's whatever's going to come from the API. You're going to be stored right here. And the observers is an array of callbacks that will be run in a loop whenever this value changes. Now in mobx, when this value changes, when you call you set a variable value, let's say in your UI or something like that, you input in the form, or you click the button, and that's going to update in the state. You have your two-way data binding, one-way data flow. So two-way data binding means this is bound to data, meaning it receives it, and it's also binding data, means it also sends it. So in mobx, when you send the data with a button click down to the view model, and the view model sends it to the repository to update this value, mobx will be tracking that, and it will broadcast to the view model will broadcast back to the components. But we're doing it with this custom observable, we're doing it manually. So this observers array, when it gets called, and notify. We say this to observers for each observer this value, meaning run the callback with whatever the value is here, which means you're manually you're manually running a broadcast method to whoever is listening to it. Now, get and set, subscribe. Okay, put the callback on the array. Get and set the value. So in other words, update this, and then the notify means call each one. So that's probably pretty straightforward. This is straightforward. That's straightforward. The repository probably is also straightforward. Now the repository has its dependency is injected. The dependency of the API is injected right here in the constructor. So this API get, and the programmer's model is its own state, right? So this is the value that's going to be updated. Just like in the observable, this value is its state. Okay, so repository is basically keeping this programmer's model is a representation of the observable's value, and so you're making a copy essentially. And then so it has a the repository has a reference to the database through the driver, the API call. And it also has a reference to the observable, which is its actual state that it's going to be being managed through PubSub through the observable pattern. So your custom your roll your own MobX is that observable. So data and where it's stored, and this is your modeling of that. Again, where this is a copy. Okay. So create the gateway and create and instantiate. I'm sorry. Yeah. So you instantiate basically import MobX here and instantiate your value, your trackable value, your observable value, and get a handle to your API call, so you can call these various methods, which are nothing but means by which you will update this programmer's model. Well, excuse me, means by which you will update the observable value, and the observable value will do the programmer's model. Okay. So let's see. Yeah. All right. So we have these low. It's been a little while since I was in this one, so I kind of, it's probably good to look at this. But anyway, all right. So load, post, delete, add and remove books, plural, get all the books. Okay. All right. Let's see. Yeah. All right, so we have these methods. Let's go in the presenter. And I find it easier actually to look at things from outside in when I'm looking at this presenter here, because this is a little bit tricky. So let's go to the component file. This is the component, the index.js in this case, but it could be the app.js or whatever. It's the app. It's actually being rendered in here. Okay, so you've got your volatile state for the component, or your shadow view model. You're creating a new books presenter, okay, to which you will pass a callback. So the component is going to pass a callback to the view model. The view model is going to pass a callback to the repository. The repository is going to pass a callback to the observable. So it's 4 layers really, essentially here. Now the first layer is basically this use state, right? Your volatile state. You're going to go ahead and call the presenter's load method and pass it the callback, which essentially is to take a value and set this volatile state with it. Set the VM, set the component state with it. Okay, so that's all that's saying, is to say pass it a function which takes an argument and calls set VM with that. Okay, and then of course you call load in order for this to run. Okay, and these are just straightforward calls: post, load, remove, stuff like that. I think the hard part is this load method. That's the hard part, I think. So now let's go into the bookspresenter.load method. Okay, so now we're in bookspresenter, and here's the load method. So essentially the load method is going to take the callback, the load is it's a higher order function, essentially, which it's a function that takes it's a function which returns a function. Okay, it takes a function as an argument and returns a function. So it takes a callback method as its argument, and then let's see. Okay. So it takes the callback, which is sorry, let's go back to the index. The callback is a function which takes a value and sets the VM. Okay, that's the callback. So when you call books repository, when you call bookspresenter.load, it takes that function which sets the VM, and then inside this load body, it calls await booksrepository.getBooks, which takes itself takes a function and returns this mapper here, and then sets the callback with the result of what's been mapped. Okay, so this callback view model is what was passed here. This is the callback with set view model. Okay, so set VM generated view model. That's this right here. That's the generated view model, and this is essentially the set VM method with the data. Okay, so the data view model is derived by calling books.map book return the book name. Where do you get books.map? From booksrepository.getBooks. When you call that, you pass it a callback and let it give you the values, constructing an object and calling the callback. So essentially, you're nesting a call from the outer layer, which is set volatile state. Oh, sorry. Set volatile state, or use state. So basically, set volatile state on whatever's generated. Okay. That's here. But you don't get to that until you call booksrepository.getBooks and pass it a callback. So its callback is this whole function here, which is something that takes an argument and returns. Something that takes a function which itself takes an argument, and whose method body is to construct this view model out of the books that are accessible inside that function. Right, so let's go to booksrepository.getbooks and see what we mean by that, because it's a little bit, confusing, right? So booksrepository.getbooks. Getbooks here, right? So let's take a look at that. And just keep in mind what this is. Right? This is the callback method. So getbooks takes a callback, which is this right here, something that receives an argument and creates a view model out of that argument mapped over, and for each value returning the name. Okay, so getbooks takes this callback, and inside of its function body, it calls its own programmer's model, right? So this data representation of what's in the observable. Okay, so it calls its own programmer's model subscribe with this callback. Okay, so what is this callback? It's this right here. So the callback is going to be a function which takes values, constructs a view model out of mapping over those values. It's an array of books, so it's going to create a view model out of that array mapped over, returning just the name, and then setting the component state, the volatile state, with that view model. Okay, so you're delegating work successively through these layers. So by this repository data model layer, it is taking a value, constructing a mapper function or another array. So this is going to be this book is going to be an array. It's expecting an array. It's going to map over it and return just the name. And then with what is produced out of that map, because obviously, you fundamentally know JavaScript, so a mapper creates a new array, create a copy out of the array copy, which is created from the mapper function, returning just the name. We have this. We now have this view model, which we set in volatile state from the use state method. So now we have volatile state, and it's propagated all the way up through these all three layers without prop drilling. So you've not drilled any props. What you've done is instead you've passed callbacks. All right. So that, I think, is really the most challenging part of it. And then of course you're calling subscribe with this callback method, which I think we already mentioned, which is just subscribe is just sorry, we have to go to the observable for that. This dot programmer's model is the observable, right? Okay. Yeah. So the programmer's model is what I said as I was. The programmer's model is the data. It is the data, but it's based on what's the observable is. Okay, the programmer's model is the data, but the observable is managing it. Okay, and so when we say this dot programmer's model dot subscribe with this callback here, then we want to go over to that, which is the observable. Let me get over there. Yeah. subscribe method is just to put that callback on the array of observers, which will be looped over when you notify, and each one will be called. I hope that clears things up at least a little bit, because this was really challenging for me too. So yeah, hopefully that hopefully that's a little bit more useful. Thanks.